Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative and creative individuals who are helping to shape the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in ranch brokerage and land conservation, or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, pretty much anyone who's doing important work and has an interesting story to tell. My guest today is Taylor Keene. Taylor is a teacher, community builder, and Native American thought leader based out of Omaha, Nebraska. His backstory is as diverse as it is impressive. He's a member of both the Omaha tribe and the Cherokee Nation. He attended Dartmouth College and Harvard University, and he enjoyed a successful stint in corporate America before returning to Nebraska to teach entrepreneurship and management at Creighton University. His most recent undertaking is Sacred Seed, a project with the goal of preserving Native American heritage and history through collecting, growing, and spreading the seeds of corn and other traditional Native American foods. The writer Wallace Stegner theorized that people generally fit into one of two categories. They're either boomers or they're stickers. Boomers are, quote, those who pillage and run and want to make a killing and end up on Easy Street. Stickers, however, are just the opposite. They are, quote, motivated by affection, by such a love for place and its life that they want to preserve it and remain in it, end quote. Well, Taylor's the walking embodiment of a sticker. Given his drive, intelligence, education, he could have followed the path of the boomer and pursued any number of careers. But a deep love of his Native American heritage and his community called him back home to teach, lead, and live a life devoted to service of others. It's a truly inspiring story. I could have talked to Taylor for hours, and I only asked him about a third of the questions I'd prepared, but we still managed to dig into a wide variety of fascinating topics. We discussed the history and mission of Sacred Seed and where he sees the project going in the future. We talked about his path from the West to the Ivy League, some of the decisions that led him to transition from corporate America to higher education, and some very interesting Native American history. One of my favorite parts of our conversation was Taylor's recounting the advice he received from his grandfather soon after graduating from Harvard Business School. This was a very enlightening conversation for me, and I greatly appreciate Taylor taking the time to chat. I encourage you to visit the Sacred Seed website and watch the video. You can find links to everything we discuss in the episode notes on the webpage. So here you go, Taylor Keene. The way I've been starting out these interviews when I'm chatting with people, I ask them that when they meet somebody for the first time and the person asks that question that people love to ask, what do you do? How do you describe that? How do you answer that?
Well, as time has gone on, coming from the Native American tradition, I began to really realize that as a teacher, I was most effective whenever I became a storyteller. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of my friends who know me well would say, you are pretty good at shooting the bull, so storyteller it is.
Nice. And so as part of that, I know you wear a ton of different hats, and that's one of the things I thought was so interesting about you and your work. But I know that you are a teacher, and you work at you run a new nonprofit that I want to talk about. And so maybe we can just kind of dive into the first part of that, which is your most recent project, the Sacred Seed Project. And could you just explain a little bit about what that project is and what your mission is with that project? Because I think it's very, very, very interesting and important.
Well, I appreciate that. Sacred Seed has been a project that's been very near and dear to my heart. Most of its present status is a nonprofit in the state of Nebraska, but we are quickly growing and establishing I would say more of a broader digital footprint. But most of the story about Sacred Seed is kind of tied to a lot of my larger work. I'm working on a book project, which in essence is going backwards in time into my Native American roots, trying to understand what the real story of this continent was.
Yep.
And along that journey, began to realize how important corn was to the prosperity and perhaps some of the challenges on this continent, say 1,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And but before I began to really understand the magnitude of what was a part of the history, about 10 years ago, one of my favorite mentors in life and father figure is Dr. Deward Walker, who's the chair emeritus of the anthropology department there at CU Boulder.
Okay.
And I had been out there and first started flirting with becoming a university professor there in Boulder. Goodness gracious, almost 20 years ago. And but I became very close with Dr. Walker and Vine Deloria Jr., one of our most preeminent Native American thinkers, was there at CU Boulder at the time. And Charles Wilkinson, environmentalist, water rights lawyer, and people like Walter Echo Hawk and John Echo Hawk from the Native American Rights Fund. So for me, it was the hotbed of the Native intelligentsia, and so I got the opportunity to learn a lot from all those wonderful thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
And some years later, I had heeded the call of service back to go work at the Cherokee Nation. Ultimately, I served on our Cherokee National Council and helped lead a bunch of our economic development activities. But right before I had gotten on the National Council, Deward will often call me, and we have very serious chats about things. And as an anthropologist, Deward's one of the good guys, meaning he was helping Indian tribes. Most anthropologists, and if there are anthropologists in your audience, forgive me, many of them just study Indians.
Sure.
And Deward never took that as a model. He wasn't a collector of objects or an esteemed authority from his own perspective. He has always helped tribes with things around sacred geography, American Indian religious freedom, like, for example, helping to fight for the rights of incarcerated Native Americans to practice their religion, to grow their hair long, to attend sweat lodge ceremonies. So I've always trusted Deward and looked for his guidance on things. And so it was about 10 years ago, he, one of our conversations said, young man, what are you doing to protect your corn? And I said, my corn? I don't know what you're talking about, Deward. And ultimately what he was alluding to was what we now know as a big battle between a lot of the, if you can even call them producers or manufacturers of genetically modified organisms like corn. And so, for example, the battles between Monsanto and farmers in India, he had been following that battle.
Yep.
And was concerned that they were going to try to get the intellectual property rights for indigenous corn, and therefore, what was I doing to protect it? And I, of course, knew nothing about any of these things at that point, and says, I don't know, but can they really do that, Deward?
Yeah.
And he says, well, it's worth checking into. And so that planted the seed, so to speak. And a couple of years after that, like I said, when I was serving on the National Council for the Cherokee Nation, our ethnobotanist there at the Cherokee Nation, Pat Glenn, had approached the Natural Resource Committee and talked about this seed bank in Svalbard, Norway. And I said, this is important, and I don't know if we should put stuff in there, but we should be thinking along those lines. And after the meeting, I pulled him aside. I said, hey, is it true that Monsanto and some of these other corporations might be trying to get our corn? And he laughed and said, yes. And so at that point, I was hooked. And I said, hey, how can we go about this?
So just for my education on this, they would get a native seed or a seed that hadn't really been in any sort of production for, 100 years. They would grab that and then figure out what it is genetically and then patent that. Is that correct?
Well, I think in its if one were to be pessimistic, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But understanding a little bit about patent law, and I'm certainly no expert, but if they're not new and novel, you can't patent them. So a bunch of the old strains couldn't be, but if they created hybrids.
Got it. Use that as a base to build something else. I got you.
Yeah. And so that started a lot of the journey. And so I asked Pat, because I said, hey, do we have all of our old crops? And he says, we have some. And he says, I'm skeptical on how many of them have been cross-pollinated. And for those who have followed some of these GMO battles, basically, if any of their corn cross-pollinates yours, which can easily happen,
mm-hmm.
They own your corn.
I've heard that, yeah.
And so, long story short, Pat and his staff there at the Cherokee Nation Seed Saving Project, my understanding is that they started looking around to find old strains, and ironically, they looked into the annals of anthropology and museums, and ultimately found some really old strains, and that's what started my project with Sacred Seed. And we began to look, further, and I'm from two tribes, the Cherokees and the Omahas, and at one point I used to think they were radically different, but the more I learn about history is how much we are all related.
On the surface, so, what did you think was different about those two tribes?
Well, I mean, just kind of growing up, knowing the Omahas or, Western Plains tribe,
mm-hmm.
Everything was about the bison. I'm a member of the Earthen Bison clan for the Omahas.
Mm-hmm.
And the Cherokees were, arguably from the southeast.
Yes.
Although the more I learn about history, it's the East Coast, and our creation stories are even more fantastical than that. But in a lot of my research for my book project, I began to realize that so many of the cosmologies are the same. For example, in Cherokee cosmology, you have first father and first mother. Kanati is the deer hunter, and Selu is Mother Corn.
Wow.
And so I began to realize that there's this old cosmology that ties all of the tribes together somehow in some ancient old story. And I'm probably my life's quest to figure out what that all is. But certainly corn played a big piece in that. And as I began to learn more about what was being done here in Nebraska historically, realized that we had four sisters. And when it comes to the staples of agriculture, and corn being one, beans, squash, and then the sunflower.
Mm-hmm.
And where I found a good amount of seeds here locally, ironically again, was out at the Fur Trader Museum out in western Nebraska,
mm-hmm.
not too far from Fort Atkinson. And when somebody told me that, I said, "What? Are you sure?" And they said, No, I heard. They have these really rare Omaha pumpkin squash seeds. I said, well, I know that we had those. I've been looking around and talking to people in the tribe, and nobody has any. And so eventually I made my trek out there, and sure enough, they had, a handful of packets of some of these seeds and some other seeds.
When you got there and asked that question, was it a surprise? The person who was working there that you met with, were they surprised to hear that question, or did they know exactly what you were talking about right off the bat?
Oh, they knew what I was talking about, and the folks that were running it at the time were very knowledgeable about the history, and began to explain to me that the Fur Trader Museum was just the next catharsis of what had been the fur trading post. That was the primary one in Nebraska at the time.
Yep.
And so they had this legacy, and being good traders, they kept notes on everything. Ultimately, it produced a singular work that documented a lot of those activities. And so you had that gentleman, his name was Oscar Will, and his son Charles Will had actually
written the book, I think probably in the 1950s or 60s, and published it much after his father's life of running this trading post. And in that piece of work, brilliantly, they documented all of the activities of the tribes around agriculture and trade. And basically it was a how-to of how we planted, when we planted, what shapes were the fields in, were they structured in mounds, how were they planted together, and not only told us how to plant again and when, but also why and what the economics were at the time. And so here I was finding this recipe backwards into time of exactly how we took care of our four sisters, and began to realize the beauty of things that we now call companion planting. So because those fields, they weren't changed every other year. They were good for about 10 years. And I realized one of the reasons why is they planted corn and beans together. And so it was just beautiful the way they laid it out. These rectangular little plots that that Omaha family would plant on, and the size of the mounds to get the corn out of the water, because these were arid varieties, and plant the squash in between, and the beans climbed the corn, and the sunflowers were planted on the south-facing side, so that those big, huge winds that always come on the plains, somewhere in late June usually, would serve as a windbreak so we didn't lose a whole bunch of corn to the tough winds. And from the economics of it was fascinating, because all those tribes indigenous to Nebraska, up until their dislocation down to Oklahoma, the Pawnee, the Ponca, the Oto, the Iowa, the Sac and Fox, all those tribes around here, they were between 75 and 100% economically self-reliant on the excess sale of corn alone.
Wow.
And, when you look at today's American Indian reservations, it's the opposite. And we're not economically self-reliant. But here is a tried and true historical solution to that. At least that's what I saw. I saw that as a salvation for all my relatives who live on reservations.
Yep.
And even for those of us who are not, I saw a passage into the past and a way to reconnect with history and culture and certainly nature. And so the past couple of years, my backyard has been transformed from what was a backyard to grow grass. Now it's just a huge garden, and seems to be getting a lot of attention from a lot of people.
Yeah, that video that I came across online, which is how I learned about your work, I thought it was very well done, and I'll put a link to that on our webpage so that people can watch it. But I thought that was a really good intro to the project, and you can actually see the garden and see you walking around out there in it. It's just great. Can you talk a little bit?
That was after the rain had taken about 50% of the corn. And the pure beauty of those gardens while they're growing, but as you're reaching harvest time, everything's starting to dry up. Of course, they all have their own time and place, but in that video, one of the things that had happened during the summer, I was terribly disappointed when we lost a lot of the corn. It wasn't just my plot. We've got 10 or 12 plots that we worked with here around the city of Omaha, and all similar fates. But in my yard, I had also introduced, I'm always trying to bring in new varieties. And so this year we had introduced Beyond the Four Sisters, real strawberries. That's a huge part of our cosmology and stories. Cherokee okra, which is massive. By the end of the season, they were 13, 14 feet tall, as was Cherokee flower corn. And the Rickford sunflowers that we planted were even taller than that. They were probably 14 or 15 feet tall. And I'd introduced some Cherokee dipper gourds, which when dried have ceremonial use as a gourd dipper. So I planted some of those. And some of these heirloom varieties were just beyond comprehension because we're used to seeing tight manicured little gardens.
Mm-hmm.
They were these, there's one plant that I planted ended up producing, I think it was 33 big dipper gourds, and they're huge.
Wow.
And they took full advantage of the corn that had fallen over in the heavy rains and winds, and they climbed up those, and I let them, and they ultimately climbed up on the telephone line and pulled it off the house by the end of the season. So that was part of what you'll see in that video, is me walking around looking up at the dipper gourds into the sky. But it changed me.
Yeah, I remember when we were talking yesterday, you mentioned that, and I'd love to hear the details on that. How did it change you?
Well, I mean, just finding that book, Corn of the Upper Missouri River, seeing this recipe of, how my ancestors and other tribes in the West were able to, to have corn sustain them as a tribe, economically speaking. But more than that, there were all the stories of the songs that were sung and the role of boys and girls in that process. And, I just tried as much as possible to recreate that, and also went to elders within our tribe. My clan, the Earthen Bison clan, we are keepers of the red corn. And so the taboo is we can't even touch it. And in our history and as part of our culture, I was able to visit with a lot of elders who all remembered a little bit of something.
Uh-huh.
Now, here's how they roasted the corn to make it sweet. That only women were supposed to plant, and only women of fertile age were supposed to plant. And it really kind of opened up something that I've explored in the rest of the writing of my book, ultimately understanding more about the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine. And so this is the second year that we planted that way, and the men folk have a certain part of the duties. We can help prepare the ground, but when it comes time to plant, we get out of the way, and I call on all the women who will come help me, and we get out of the way and let them do the planting.
Your timing, I couldn't imagine your timing could have been much better, because I would imagine you're really close to running out of time to that link of people who are alive who actually remember any of that. I would think 10 years from now, it would be pretty hard to find people who have a memory of that. Is that correct?
That is correct, and that was certainly something that stumbling onto a project like this that's what's been so fulfilling. I had my mother come and offer the prayer and the blessing for us as we planted on the new moon in May, which is our time to plant.
Mm-hmm. And
just getting back to those rhythms of the earth, that was the first thing I noticed that began to change me, because we just finished with the harvest a month or two ago, and chopped and diced up all of the plants of what was left and let them turn back into the earth, and cutting down hickory and oak to make wood ash lye, and wood ash for the soil. And now we're starting to get some snow, then that will pack it and preserve it and help break it down, so by spring we have more nutrients back in the ground again.
Mm-hmm.
And then knowing that come April it's time to start getting those seeds ready, and where are we going to plant, and where's our new plots, and who's going to help me do all this? And so it's kind of brought us back into the natural cycles, and understanding the movements of the moon.
Yeah.
That all of that is just it's been I feel like I'm getting back to an ancient ritual of sorts, just by the fact that I have this relationship with the plants now. Mm-hmm. And all of our old stories, whatever tribe you come from, most of them say you got to sing to the corn, so I sing.
That's
I
great.
think that's in one of those videos.
Yeah, it is. And I saw that in the video.
And there's just something magical about the whole thing. And I said, it's changed me as a person to understand those cycles, and it gives me a tremendous amount of peace and balance to know that even if it's just for a little bit, maybe it's just my backyard, and now the number is growing of other seed ambassadors who have helped us at Sacred Seed, but they all share a story, and we have a fall festival to celebrate the harvest. We bring all the growers together, and everybody tells stories. Of course, we eat brilliantly, and locally we found a great chef who's been a wonderful partner with us, who can take all these wonderful heirloom, organic, all natural varieties and turn it into something phenomenal. And so it's allowed us an opportunity to even rethink Thanksgiving. So much of the real history of that is pretty contrived here in America. But without getting sucked into those politics, I know that this fall harvest festival is what it's really supposed to be like, and hopefully it's going to be something that many people here and where I'm at will enjoy as it grows, but hopefully it can be something that can be expanded into other places all over the West.
Yeah. So if you're thinking about this project and you think about where you'd like to be 5 years from now with the project, what do you see going on with Sacred Seeds?
Well, I hope that we just continue to grow our agricultural land base. But basically, we kind of got that sort of backyard by backyard. One of the big concerns with this project is always cross-pollination, and so especially in a place like Nebraska or anywhere here in the West, there's all these huge GMO plots, but they're not in the inner parts of the city for the most part. So as long as I'm a mile away from any GMO stuff, we're fine. So we do our best to pollinate by hand and make sure that they're all protected. But hopefully, I've got a great story to tell in 5 years that we've got seed ambassadors all over the country, or all over the world for that matter, finding more and more people who are interested in these. And as we began the project, a lot of people ask, well, what's the goal here? And I used to try to measure it in, we're going to have a big farm. I want to sell to all the great gourmet restaurants here in town, feed the farmers markets, and that perspective has changed for me to some degree, and because it's really just from the personal experience that I've had in my own backyard, tilling the soil and following the cycles and watching these beautiful crops grow naturally, and learning the relationships of the four sisters, and having to make rabbit-proof fences as much as that's really unlikely to be able to keep them out. And then understanding things like the squash, and it keeps the raccoons away from the corn, and once this thing was in my backyard, realizing what an ecosystem it was, and watching all the varieties of bees and wasps and hornets and spiders and birds and squirrels and everything just migrated to my backyard. And I want people to experience that.
That's interesting that you've had that change in perspective, because from the little bit I know about your background, I know that you have an MBA and you were in the business world for a while. And it sounds like when you started approaching this, it was more that mindset. And as you got into it, you kind of zoomed out and saw it in a more holistic way, that's pretty interesting. They beat that MBA out of you.
Well, I'd like to joke that that the earth and the corn have coaxed me out of thinking that way.
Yeah.
It's not that I don't employ my my Harvard MBA. It just makes me think bigger. And if there's anything I learned from going to school out east, was use your mind to the best of your abilities, dream. And as a university professor now of corporate strategy, that's what it comes down to for me. I'm working with students or nonprofits or for-profits or startups. Strategy in the end is, what's the one thing that you and your organization can do better than anybody else in the world? And after counseling, I don't know how many students and entrepreneurs in that capacity, I had to ask myself, what's the one thing I can do better than anybody else in the world? And it's this. And I can employ all of my faculties and all the things I've learned over the years into the exploration of all this beautiful part of my roots. And hopefully, my ancestors are happy. And I couldn't think of anything better to do than would be to pay homage to Mother Earth, and the Four Sisters, and all of my ancestors by combining it all together and trying to share it with others. There was a pivotal point where I realized that somebody had said to me, because we were discussing why it's called Sacred Seed, and I said, well, there's some things that are beyond commerce. And that really struck the students on my team at that time. And they were very interested in that. We began to study economics of gifting economies. And if something really is sacred, then it can't be monetized. And so we had these wonderful discussions. It was really aided by a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, which is a lovely book. And
I'll have links to all these books in the notes as well.
Yeah, we tried to put most of them up on sacredseed.org. I'll make sure that Braiding Sweetgrass is up there too.
Great.
But that there are things that are beyond that, and we began to realize that it's so hard to grow some of this stuff, and just the care that comes into it. Watching your perceived losses or to the gain of the raccoons or squirrels or birds. But it's just a natural part of the cycle. And so we've adapted our thinking. Now we grow a little bit more so that the raccoons and the squirrels can have some too.
That's great.
And the birds. And it's like I said, it's not just the plants, but when those sunflowers are ripened and there's birds all over the place and they're happy and the squirrels are happy and these old varieties are so prolific. It's just like, well, that's what this is made for.
Yeah.
So not meant to be at the dominion of humans. We're stewards, and I really began to realize that there's a much broader learning experience around this that is sacred. And like I said, that's where I began to measure things differently, that I want other people to experience this, and therefore we all have a greater love for Mother Earth and its bounty, and that kind of goes with the whole notions of what I've come to call living red, and perhaps an homage to my ancestors, but a pining for the way that this country used to look, pining for the return of bison, which many people have said I was crazy to ever think about that it's ever possible. Of course it's possible. Anything's possible.
There's a guy I admire, I'm sure you've heard of him, out of South Dakota named Dan O'Brien. Have you heard of him? And I saw him speak a year or two ago, and he was at the Patagonia store here in Boulder, and he was talking about his partnership with Patagonia. And I was really amazed with the work he's doing. And we kind of commiserated after the fact about some conservation issues in the West. And he just seemed like a great guy. And we've actually been emailing, and I'm hoping to get him on the podcast as well, because I think it's a different, obviously different than what you're doing, but I think it's all in the same spirit.
It is all in the same spirit, and that's part of the stuff that I want to do next. I've been talking with some of there's at least 2 outfits here in Nebraska that are doing justice to bison, and there's the Gottschall Ranch, which is one that I want to work with, and there's the Hutchinson Ranch. But I was told some phenomenal stories around that. One of the local chefs here in Omaha from the Great Plume, Clayton Chapman, is a good guy. And I showed him some of my corn. He was very interested, and he wanted to hear all the stories about how we grew it. When you heard about
the role of the sacred feminine. He was fascinated, and he conveyed a story about how his grower had begun to work with the Lakotas who would come down, and he was just in awe of the degree of sacredness that kind of went along with it. And every time that they've gone for a harvest, so to speak, the Lakotas come down and they take it very seriously. And there's a lot of ceremony and prayer and song. And in essence, what happens every time is that the herd splits down the middle, and there's one that's left, and it walks up on this ridge, and there they take it. And so, these are things that we thought were lost, I think. But there's all this wonderful, magical things that are still a part of this world if you believe in it, and if you've got the heart to try to go back and find it again. And I said, to me, that's worth more than any amount of money or anything else to be a part of. It's magical.
It is. And I think the third aspect is that you're willing to work harder than anybody else, because the reality is you're swimming upstream. You're going against these massive, the way that these massive corporations have set up the agricultural system, and, the bison, with the bison ranching, you're going against the meat industry, just kind of the easiest way to make money. And so you're fighting economic forces, you're fighting cultural forces. I don't know if fighting is the right word, but those are all
it's fighting.
Going against, you're going against the grain. And so, I think there are a lot of people with big dreams. A lot of people can sit around and say how things should be, but you're doing it. And that's a lot different than just talking and having good intentions. You're putting in, who knows how many hours and hundreds and thousands of hours towards this. And I just think it's amazing. And those people like you are the reason that we're going to be able to keep living in the West and enjoying it the way we have.
Oh, I appreciate that. It's a very fine compliment. I had to notice that you used some terminology there, and I don't know if you know what the meaning of Omaha is.
I don't, but I want to know.
In our language, Umaha means the people that move against the current.
Does it really? Wow.
Does.
Very cool.
So you hit the nail right on the head.
All right. I didn't even know that. Wow. I feel smart for the day now. Well, one thing, I like I was saying yesterday, I could talk to you for hours, but I want to be respectful of your time. But one thing that I've found through this podcast is that, there's so many passionate people who are doing so much important work out in the West, but they also have interesting personal backstories. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about your personal backstory, because from what I've seen, there's some interesting things there. So where did you grow up?
Well, I coming from two different tribes, I've been around both all my life. My childhood, most of it was spent down in Cherokee country. I grew up in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, and our joke was we came up here every summer to get beat up on the reservation. That was until we hit puberty, and then there was some payback.
Yeah,
but I've always had strong ties to my Omaha and Cherokee roots, so Nebraska and Oklahoma.
Okay, and you went east for school to some of the best schools in the entire world. What got it in your head to go east versus staying out here, and what was that journey like?
Well, at some point, I think it had more to do with somebody told me I couldn't do it.
Nice. That's a common theme.
And somewhere I got it in my head that, I've always liked thinking, and I've always liked school, which is not ironic that I become a professor now. But somewhere along the way, I had this fanciful dream about going to the Ivy League, and I said somebody probably told me I couldn't do it, so I decided I was going to try it. And I did go to a prep school for an extra year to get myself prepared for it.
Okay.
That was the real life-changing thing.
Where was that?
I went to a school called Northfield Mount Hermon.
Okay. I'm sure that was quite a change in culture very quickly.
Yeah, it was. And as a matter of fact, I just ran into a friend from that era who I recalled teasing me because when I showed up, I was in, Wranglers, ropers, and a cowboy hat.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as the weather changed, I was fortunate enough to be able to be a part of a program that helped prepare us for transitions. And it was noted when I first came back from the L.L. Bean store that, all of a sudden I had khakis and duck boots and flannels. So.
I went to a prep school as well, and I had some Texan classmates, and I remember the first year we were in the mountains of Virginia, and there was a big ice storm, and the first ice storm of the year, and I saw a freshman walking in a Texan freshman walking in cowboy boots, and he was trying to go down the sidewalk, and those cowboy boots were not working with the ice. And the next time I saw him, he was decked out in the LL Bean stuff as well.
Yeah.
So when you got there to boarding school or even in college, and you went to Dartmouth, is that correct?
I did.
What was the biggest surprise? I'd say, I mean, obviously there are probably too many to count, but was there one thing that surprised you more than anything? Because I grew up in the East and moved West, and I just couldn't believe the cultural changes and the geography and the topography and all that. And so I'd love to hear your perspective kind of going the other way.
Well, I was certainly struck by the sheer beauty of New England. I remember the first morning that I arrived in Northfield, Massachusetts. This gorgeous old building, and we were looking right at the White Mountains, and they were purple. Mm-hmm. I couldn't help but think, that's Purple Mountain Majesty right there.
Yeah, that's right.
That was what I really realized is, what a wonderful opportunity it is to learn. And I had come from, public schools and had never been exposed to things like philosophy or philosophy of religion, all these other things. So I just was a kid in the candy store in terms of I could think about whatever I wanted to and could be challenged. So, but besides the fact that they talked really fast,
yeah.
I discovered that I had what I would use in economic terms was a comparative advantage,
mm-hmm.
meaning that I was from the West, and I knew about horses and cattle, and I had cowboy boots.
Sure.
And so really all I had to do was change the cowboy boots and some Timberlands, and I already had some flannel shirts, but just a little bit heavier, and I was somebody different and unique out there. And but I could fit in just fine the way I was. A lot of people still like to make fun of my accent.
Hey, I know the feeling. I used to do a lot of work in Montana, and on two separate occasions, completely unrelated, I had Montana ranchers ask me if I was from Scotland. And I said, well, somebody was about 400 years ago, but I'm not. I guess I've still got a little bit of it in me. So you went to Harvard for 2 different graduate degrees. Is that correct?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I went to the business school, and then I went through the John F. Kennedy School of Government as well.
And then spent some time in the business world from my research, sounds like during the dot-com boom, and then some afterwards. And then you decided you wanted to head back out to where you're from and teach. Can you talk a little bit about that decision and how, because I would imagine not many people would have the guts to make that decision if they've got this basically unlimited earning potential in front of them to walk away from that to go into teaching. How did you come to that decision?
That's a very good question. I think overall, when I think back to my corporate years, I just was never that cut out for it, as much as I tried to convince myself at the time. And probably anyone who knows me well would probably agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Because,
Well, there was something certainly striking that I was told whenever I graduated. I came back here for a ceremony here in the Omaha Indian Country, and in essence, you have a celebration. Your family puts forth. This was for a war dance celebration, but there's an opportunity for a blessing within there. And in essence, you're inviting everyone to your war dance party. Mm-hmm. And there's a certain portion of it where there is the man in charge. And it was my grandpa Valentine Parker. He's gone now. But in essence, he's going to counsel you in front of the whole tribe or whoever is chosen to be there to witness it. And it's just a proud, special occasion for my family, especially my mother. And I will forever remember his address to me. And he said, "Grandson, you're my own," meaning we were of the same bloodlines. And he said, "I don't know much about what you've been through." He says, "But what they tell me, those schools that you attended were some of the best." And he said, "I know your teachings from your grandmother. God gave you a mind and use it." He said, "That's good." But he chastised me a little bit. He said, "Now you've learned all the ways of the white man. Mm-hmm. Make sure you learn our ways too." And that's where he gave a careful warning. And he said, "You need to be careful with what you're doing there." He says, some of them, and he was just referring broadly, I think, to the whole corporate world, or maybe even to the white world. He said, some of them worship money. Mm-hmm. And the Creator, Wakanda, doesn't want us to do that. And he went on and he said, when it's all said and done, and the Creator calls you home, nobody's going to remember what titles you had or how much money you made. Mm-hmm. The only ones that are going to remember anything about you are those that you touched their hearts and their lives, those that loved you. And so that was not the thing that I was.
How old were you? How old were you when he told you that?
MBA from Harvard.
Yeah.
But it really did touch me, and now that I go back and look at things, it was important for me to learn about business, and I certainly apply it as part of my profession as a university professor. But I also have different roles presently. I'm still chairman of the board for the Omaha Nation's hospitality endeavors. Mm-hmm. And so it's all business there, and it's about job creation and hopefully wealth creation for the individual families. And so it's kind of come full circle. But the other thing that I noticed along the way was, I probably don't really need that much. I got a nice house, and I've got a lot of nice friends, and I'm close to both my tribes, and those are the things that matter in the end. Mm-hmm. And I try to be smart with my finances, but I don't need a Porsche. I don't need an opulent house. Yep. I have a beautiful old home that I've helped maintain and restore with my own hands, and I've got this great backyard where it seems to be getting a lot more attention than I think had I done the other path.
Sure. I just
walk the red road, as we call it.
Well, it seems like you've got it figured out. I just read a book by Sebastian Junger, the guy who wrote Perfect Storm.
Sure.
It's really short, and it's called Tribe, and it's about. He's talking mostly about the military and how when these soldiers come home, they have so many problems, but he expands it beyond that. And he actually talks about an experience he had on with a Native American tribe when he was in high school. But the basic thesis of the book is that the reason there's so many people have such a hard time these days in the United States is because they're lacking community and they're lacking purpose. And so when these people come home from the military, they've been in this tight knit community, sleeping in these tight knit quarters, on a mission. You can argue whether the mission's good or bad, but they've got a goal. And then they come home and they're sitting in an apartment or in the suburbs, completely isolated. And it seems like what you're doing is you've obviously got a mission and you've obviously got a very tight community. And it seems like we're wired for that. That's what we're supposed to be that way.
It is. And, that's one of the extrapolations that as I've been exploring what I've been calling Living Red. That's one of the pieces. And as a strategist, I get to work with a lot of organizations, and I've incorporated a lot of these teachings into that. Because what I tell everybody is, economically speaking, the most resilient organization there is a tribe, because it incorporates everyone together. And examples that I've used, whether it be Native American tribes here in America or the Hebrew tribe, kind of a stark way to describe it, but even if you want to destroy us, you have to kill all of us, because if you don't, we'll still be there. And being a part of a tribe it's not a club. It's beyond that. And economically speaking, it is the most resilient organization there is. And there's a lot of lessons that other types of organizations can learn from it. And I've done some really neat experimentations with non-traditional organizations that were trying to do that. For example, the notion of clans. So the way that I've come to learn to understand is that clans are all those things that are the most necessary for the tribe to maintain its order, its stability. And so whether that be with examples like with the Omahas, we have earthen clans and we have sky clans. And I could never know that much about all the other clans. I can speak for our earthen bison clan. And that, we had a particular responsibility, and typically it was for the hunt and the allocation of those meat across the tribe. And there's the Sky Bison clan, and from those that I know in that clan, and from the little that I've learned from them, a lot of it's more spiritual and ceremonial. They were responsible for a certain part of the tail dance of our war dance, and certain songs and rites. And so I began to see this much bigger picture of not just thinking about organizations in the typical business way, but understanding a deeper, even ceremonial meaning. And that's the difference between organizations and tribes. I love Younger's work. I look forward to exploring what he's done there.
Yeah, it's very good. I'll send it to you. I'll get it on Amazon Prime coming your way, so you'll have it in the next 2 days. I
appreciate it.
Yeah, you'll love it. It's I'd say it's one of the top 2 books I've read in the last few years. I think about it daily, and I think you would really get a lot out of it. Speaking of books, are there 1 or 2 books about just Native American culture, basic stuff that for somebody who does not have any real understanding of it, the best 1, 2, 3 books that you would recommend that they should read?
Sure. There's a couple that always come to mind for me. If somebody doesn't really know a whole lot about the history, you can't go wrong with reading Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. And my own personal favorites come from one of the mentors I got to spend a little time with. That was Vi Deloria Jr. And he wrote a couple of seminal pieces of work. One was Custer Died for Your Sins, which was really an homage. Well, at least at the time when I first read it, it seemed to be an homage to the Red Power movement of the late 1960s, and it wasn't until my 30s and 40s that I was able to see beyond that it really was an homage to those people that were protectors of sacred geography, whether it be dams that are all over the place, whether that's North Dakota, the Pacific Northwest, or down in the old Cherokee country in the southeast, to the modern day extensions of that would be the water protectors at the Dakota Access Pipeline or the Keystone Pipeline, which I've been a part of both. It took me a long time to understand what Vine was talking about. He went on even further in his next work, or subsequent to Custer Died for Your Sins, was God is Red. And that's one where he really explained that at the core of all of our religion is sacred geography and earth, and our relationship with Mother Earth, and ultimately how our jobs as human beings are to be stewards of that. And that's really changed a lot of my life and my perspective, that those are the things that are important. Making a pile of money is not important.
Yep.
Protecting water and our resources so that the next 7 generations can enjoy them, that's important.
So one more question about your personal background.
Sure.
When you, if knowing everything you know now and having been on this journey that you've been on, if you could go back and talk to your 18-year-old self, let's say just before you're getting in the car on the airplane to head to boarding school, what advice would you give that guy? I think your grandfather's advice was pretty spot on.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to top that. I don't know that I would change a whole lot. I was so curious and hungry for knowledge. Study what you're passionate in. I wouldn't change that at all. I loved studying history and English when I was at Dartmouth, and it's come full circle, combining all the different aspects of my past into to becoming a writer and a speaker and a thinker. Hopefully it's an honorable path.
Seems like it to me. So I've got a few questions that I've been asking everybody I've interviewed, and we've gotten some really diverse and interesting answers, and they're pretty quick questions, and you don't have to give a quick answer, but you mentioned those 3 books about Native American culture. Are there any other books that have been very important to you that you would say your favorite book of all time?
Books that I've read that I love?
Mm-hmm.
I've really enjoyed Braiding Sweetgrass, which I mentioned before.
Yes.
And I'm sitting here in my home office and library looking at others that have had a pronounced influence. One that really influenced me a lot was a work by the Lakota scholar, Dr. A.C. Ross. And it's entitled The Tocqueyancy, which is really hard to spell, but you can also find it under its translation into English, which is We Are All Related. And his story was similar to mine. He had finished his PhD in psychology with an emphasis on Jungian psychology, and had gone home and been chastised the same way I was. And so he combined his world there and began to ask a lot of questions. Hopefully in the work that I'm attempting to do right now with my writing project is to continue some of his work, if not some of the work of Vine Deloria.
That's great.
Just understand how we're all related.
Sure.
And how in his case was Eastern mysticism meets with the plains, and in mine I'm trying to garnish all of these ancient stories and teachings and translate them in a way that everybody can understand and hopefully appreciate the beauty in them.
And so for people, go ahead.
No, I was just this is most of the things that we say are things we've heard from elders. I had an uncle at a certain point in my life. He said, "You don't need to tell who told you, just say it. You're old enough now," he said.
That's great. So your book is going to be out, you say, in the next year, do you think? Year or so?
I hope so.
Okay.
I hope so. The scope keeps getting bigger. I might need to define that a little bit tighter, but right now it's titled Rediscovering America, Sacred Geography, the Ancient Earthworks, and the Real History of America, although I might need to split those into two different books. Things like Standing Rock and the protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline have become very poignant in a lot of people's minds and hearts. And so my guess is I'll write more about that stuff. But with all of the work, the teaching has always been, and that's what I tell everybody when I give a lecture or a talk to an audience, is I don't do this work for myself, although I love it. And I don't do it necessarily for you, although I hope all of you enjoy it. We do the work for all those souls yet to come, so they can appreciate all the water that we've carried and the bountiful gifts of Mother Earth.
That's great. That's that purpose thing we were talking about. It's, I think that's great. Yeah. That's, I hope those youngsters in your class understand how lucky they are to have a teacher like you.
Well, it's interesting because I certainly use my time there to tell them who I really am. I'll often sneak it in there at the last of the semester after we talk about corporate strategy, and then I'll sneak it in there and be like, "Hey, this is really what I'm all about. Don't discount my interest in corporate strategy," but and I give them presentation on the book work and the experiences, and with all these pictures of the sacred seeds, and it's also the journey to places for sacred geography and rediscovering all the stuff that's all around us everywhere in this country, everywhere on this continent is a litany of stories of many people who have lived here for a very long time. And I've only begun to scratch the surface, but the more I learn about the ancient cosmologies and these old stories and the mounds and the earthenworks of how complex and beautiful the society was once on this continent, and hopefully it can be enjoyed again.
I think that's very, very, very noble and important. Well, we're coming up on an hour here, so there's one question that I've been asking everybody, and if you could make a request of the people listening to this podcast, and the common denominators, they have a love for the American West, whether they express that through athletics or through careers related to conservation or ranching or architecture, artists, the whole spectrum, but the common denominator is that they have a deep love for the American West. If you could make one request of these people, what would that be?
Well, that's pretty simple, because I usually, whatever performance or talk or whatever I give, I always encourage the people. This land is amazing, and it's beautiful, and most of us love it for that reason. There are other reasons that you can love it as well. But to really understand it truly, whether you're in Colorado or Nebraska or Montana, you name it, the best way to truly understand this land really has to come from something rooted in indigenous peoples. So I always end my talks with telling them, all you good citizens of whatever state that you come from, if you really want to see the beauty of this land, you have to see it through indigenous eyes. So whatever tribe is where you're from, invite them back with open arms, because this land will never, ever be whole again until we do that. There is a relationship between the tribes and this land. And I've only begun to scratch the surface personally of understanding what that is. But there is a relationship between our bloodlines and the earth, and our blood and our bones that's in the earth. And we often call these things such
like blood DNA. That's what I've discovered when I said that, you know, planting the sacred seeds in the corn has changed me. Something in my DNA has been reawakened, and hopefully it's produced something beautiful for others to see. I can see it. And when people, wherever their homeland is, you know, if you're from Colorado there, then, you know, bring those Cheyennes and those Arapahoes back. Mm-hmm. Welcome them with open arms and let the beauty happen. I've witnessed it up over here in Nebraska when, you know, there was a formal invitation, and those Pawnees and those Otos and those Ioways and the Sac Foxes, and they came back up here for the first time, and there was tears of joy and a reconnection that I think astounded everyone, and that can happen anywhere in America, and we need to do it as good citizens of America. We need to do that.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. How can people learn more about you and your projects? I know you've got some websites and you're active on some social media.
Sure. I'm pretty easy to find. Our project is sacredseed.org. And, you know, you just Google Taylor Keene, and you can usually find me. I mean, I'm all over Facebook and Instagram and a bunch of other things. I love meeting new friends. So
great. Well, I'll put links to all that. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was very interesting. We might need to do a part 2 and 3 because I only got to about a third of my questions, but I really appreciate it.
I would look forward to that, and hopefully we'll get a positive reaction from your audience. I'd love to continue the conversations, Ed. I appreciate you reaching out.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Hey, this is Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast, and thanks for listening to that particular episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Before you go, I've got 3 quick things. Number 1, if you like the podcast, please do me a huge favor. Either pass it along to a friend who may be interested, share it on your social media, and or go to iTunes and give it a 5-star review. All those things would mean a lot to me, and they would really help to spread the word about the podcast. Number 2, if you've listened to many of these episodes, you know that I love reading and I love talking about books. Every other month, I send out a quick email with a few books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The subjects are varied, but they're pretty much all nonfiction with an emphasis on history, biographies, adventure narratives, and topics related to the American West. There are no sales pitches for ranches, no spam, no other kind of nonsense, just books. So if you'd like to sign up for the list, head to Mountain and Prairie/reading, or just go to Mountain and Prairie and there's a massive tab at the top that says book recommendations. Click on it. There are a ton of good books that I've read. Some of the old email lists are on there. You can go crazy. There are a lot of books. And finally, if you know anyone I should interview for the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. All my contact info is at mountainandprairie.com, and I'm on all the social media stuff, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to have some recommendations and suggestions of interesting people I should meet. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.